And Marty lives in Wisconsin. He's very active with Wisconsin photography clubs. He knows a lot of the different clubs. He has been he's been just great to work with. I've had the opportunity to work with him for our website development. He's our club website guru here that we've been working with. But Marty is a self-proclaimed retired rodeo photographer. And I understand Marty's done all of the different all the different roles or something in rodeo. Is that correct, Marty? Something like that?
Well,
most of them anyway.
So yeah, kind of, sort of. I'll explain. Go ahead and finish your introduction.
Great.
I'll come back to that.
Great. Anyway, I'm excited to hear Marty's presentation. And if you haven't had a chance to look at that Rodeo 101 document that was listed on the website, and also I think it was on Facebook too, it goes through the 7 different categories or events in rodeos. So I would encourage you to look at that because I think that is a great tool as well. So anyway, Marty, I'm going to turn it over to you, and thank you.
Okay, well, thank you, Dorothy, and thanks to all of you guys for having me. It sounded like you were pretty excited that I was coming to speak with you. As I've been working on your website, I've seen your wonderful work. You guys are quite a talented group, and I don't know that I'd be able to compete against you, that's for sure. So to Dorothy's point about doing a lot of things within rodeo, so I am a PRCA photographer, or gold card photographer, which means I've done it for many, many years. Kind of retired shooting actively after about 27 years of doing it for a number of reasons. But throughout my illustrious career, I wasn't just a rodeo photographer. There were times where, because rodeo is kind of a small family event, so to speak, and there's only a limited amount of workers at a given rodeo, you kind of get tasked with things that maybe don't fit your normal job. And so a number of times I was enlisted to be part of the opening acts and the entertainment acts. And so you stand in one place too long and they put you to work, I guess. So it's been a lot of fun, pretty exciting. And, you know, I guess from a spectator standpoint, that's something you guys wouldn't see. And most of the spectators wouldn't even say, hey, isn't that our photographer that we just saw, you know, jumping off the back of a stagecoach? And so anyway, it's been a lot of fun over the years. It's been a challenge over the years. So I, of course, started back in the film days, and trying to overcome exposures and getting correct lighting and all that is a real challenge. And most of the rodeos that I photograph tend to happen at night. So I see a lot of great images from daytime rodeos from a lot of people. I don't see too many nighttime pictures because it is a real challenge to get enough light to work with and still stop the action and not have it look like you were walking through a foggy scene, you know. So hopefully you'll see what I mean by that as we go here. And hopefully, if I can share my screen, yes, I can, we'll get into this. And can everybody see my screen?
Yes. Yep, looks good.
So, a little photography 101. And so I call it that because it's a good introduction to the sport of rodeo if you don't know much about it or if you haven't really photographed it. So hopefully this will give you a good idea of what it's all about. So as you can see, I'm kind of put to work there. As I was walking through the arena, I would stop and pick up flank straps and bring them back to the end in between events so that somebody else didn't have to run out there and get them as long as I was walking right by. So I would get dirty. So as you can see, I was involved with photography for the past 45 years. Started photographing rodeos in 1992. I was fortunate enough to be able to join the PRCA, the Pro Rodeo Cowboy Association, in '96. And I'm currently a gold card member. And I photographed primarily here in the Great Lakes circuit and you can see the states listed there. So the country, the PRCA divides the country into a dozen different circuits. And when you're rodeoing, you kind of either are a circuit guy or you're going all over, depending on what stage of your career you're at. And I always pretty much just stayed right here in the circuit, stayed close to home. So I never really got to go shoot any of the big rodeos like Cheyenne or Pendleton or anything like that. But you know, we've got some fantastic rodeos right here in the Midwest and some fantastic cowboys. So let's go get down and dirty here. I should mention, I will take some questions intermittently in between here. I'll have pauses that I'll say if anybody's got any questions, you can speak up. So there will be breaks along the line for that. So who are the players in rodeo? Well, you've got your rodeo committees, because a rodeo doesn't happen without them. The rodeo contestants, of course, are a big part of what rodeo is. And kind of behind the scenes, so to speak, your rodeo announcer, your queens, the judges, contract personnel, your clowns and bullfighters. There is a difference between the clowns and the bullfighters. The clowns are there to entertain the audience, where the bullfighter is there to help protect the cowboys. You have the pickup men, arena help, rodeo secretaries and timers, and of course, most importantly, the rodeo photographer, because you know, what's a rodeo without a photographer, right? So the main 7 events of rodeo: bareback riding, team roping, saddle bronc riding, steer wrestling, tie down roping, women's barrel racing, and bull riding. So an average rodeo will last between 2.5 to 3 hours, and getting all 7 of these events in here. Don, I don't know if you can see that, but it looks like you've got one person trying to get into the meeting. You're muted.
I'm not seeing somebody in the waiting room. Are you able to see it?
I'm able to see it, but because I'm live right now, I can't get to it. So hang on a second. Okay. Should have let her in. Okay. So I'm going to kind of walk through a whole different aspects, all the different aspects of rodeo. I'm going to start out with the announcers, the specialty acts, opening acts. So all the pageantry and patriotism that rodeo is known for. And we got Trish Plates coming back in here again. So sorry about this, guys.
Trying to admit her and it's not working.
Yeah, I just hit it too, and we'll see. Technology again, it's great when it works. So rodeo announcers. This here is Roger Mooney. He's probably one of the best voices in the sport itself. And some of them will work off a horseback, some will stand in the arena, some will work off of an announcer stand. So they all have their choice. Some rodeos like it when they're horseback. Trish is back. Can you see that, Don? Okay, so this is part of an opening act here, and fast girls and fast horses, or pretty girls and fast horses, I guess, are part of the opening and part of the pageantry that we get to enjoy. And again, it's a very patriotic sport. So here we're paying tribute to all the services. Big flags, solemn moments. And I'm sure any of you who have been to a rodeo have seen similar sights there that just, it always makes you feel good when you see it. At least me anyway. So this is a drill team in Manawa, Wisconsin, the Rodeo City Riders, and they do shows throughout the Midwest, and they're a very well-known, sought-after group. I should mention some of these pictures like this. My ISO is probably up in the 6,400, 8,000 range to do these. And when you have that spotlight on them, you get very little noise, even though you're at very high ISOs. So I always find that amazing. So we put the queens to work during the rodeo. They're chasing cattle out after the steers and the calves run. We got to get them back to the other end of the arena, and so they get tasked with that job. So I guess that's kind of a brief synopsis of the openings of pageantry. Anybody have questions at this point?
You may all be muted. Need to touch your space bar if you want to be unmuted.
Okay, well, no questions. Yeah, go ahead.
Marty, do you ever use flash at night? And
Oh, yeah.
Does that spook the horses?
Nope, not at all. I'll tell you, there is so much going on during the rodeo. That's a great question, Tom, but there is so much going on during the rodeo. You know, the crowds, all the arena lights, God only knows what else. If you're at a lot of times, some of these rodeos, there's a carnival going on in the background, so you have all that action. So the flash, I've talked to the contestants about it. They don't even see it go off. The animals don't seem to react to it at all. It's just they've got so much going on. That's the least of their worries. Any other questions? Okay, well, we'll move on here. So, you know, you got to have young cowboys and cowgirls to keep the sport going. So I had just a few pictures of some of the youngsters, and, you know, they get dressed up like mom and dad. And this is during grand entry. Dad looking down proudly at his daughter there. And then you have the legends of rodeo. So these two gentlemen here were at the first national finals rodeo the PRCA did back in 1959. This picture is only about 3 years old, and they are still active in the sport today. So maybe they're not competing, but you have a judge. Actually, the gentleman on the right, Mel Potter, was team roping up until about 2 or 3 years ago. He's had both shoulders redone and whatnot. So he's finally kind of given it up now at 70 some odd years old. But on the left side, Bobby Goodspeed, world champion calf roper, and he's still judging rodeos to this day. So it's kind of fun to be able to know these guys, and they are living legends. So you've got your rodeo judges who do a lot of things during the rodeo right now. And that last picture, they are looking for the marker string for the barrels. Here they're setting up the timeline for during the barrel racing. Here we're watching over the calf to make sure that the calf tie was legal and the calf stays tied for 6 seconds. So with that, any questions about the judges or anything like that?
Is the judging just time oriented, or is there, I guess, style points?
Yeah, so great question, Don. So the judging is done for the timed event. It's done just in that is that they watch the clocks. They are watching, like from the timed event shoot, there's always a barrier string there, which gives an animal a head start. So they're watching to make sure that all happens correctly. As I mentioned, when they tie the calf, they throw their hands up in the arm, that they're timing that to make sure his 6 seconds elapsed before they can let the calf loose. They've got a lot going on during the timed events. During the rough stock, that's where the style comes in. So they're judging both the animal and the cowboy on their ride. So total of 100 points could be given, and so half of that 100 points will go to how well the animal performed, half of it will go to how well the cowboy performed. And so they've got a whole set of criteria that they watch for, and that's how they end up judging those rides.
So one judge is looking at the animal and the rider at the same time?
No, so there's typically 2 to 3 judges at a rodeo, depending on the size of the rodeo. And so for in the rough stock, there's a judge kind of on either side of the arena. So one guy is watching the right side, one is watching the left side. And so, for instance, when the feet are supposed to spur up and hit up in the shoulders, well, let's say that it only happened on one side, the cowboy was having trouble getting both of them up. Well, that's going to count against it by that one judge. So the scoring is done kind of on an aggregate then. So they each are marking their scores down, and then those sheets get turned into the rodeo secretary after each event. And then they're combining the scores and saying, okay, here's where you're at with it. So you do hear scores being called out during the rodeo. The judges are saying, okay, 44, which means on his side, he gave him 44 points. it might be, 43 in the other. So you got an 87-point score. But then after the sheets are turned in, they do reevaluate that, just kind of double check to make sure that the correct scores were given during the rodeo.
So when you talk about an animal being scored for like 50% and so on, those are in the events where the animal, the horse, for instance, belongs to the rider, and the rider
No.
has great. No,
No,
are
no.
they just like random animals?
Yeah, so the bucking stock, so that's the saddle bronc, the bareback, and the bull riding, that's the bucking stock. Those animals are done by a random draw. So when the cowboys come to the rodeo, well, I should say when they come to the rodeo, they know before they come to the rodeo what animal they drew, but they can't just say, I want to be on that horse or that bull. That's an arbitrary decision made for them. And so animals, like people, can have an off day. So you can draw up the best horse or bull you want, and that animal, it might just not do well that day, might not buck as hard, might fall, might stumble, but he also might put on the greatest show on earth. So that's what makes it so fun as a sport. You just never know what you're going to get.
So
And
do those animals, the stock, follow the whole circuit, or can you have different animals at different areas?
Yeah, so every rodeo chooses a stock contractor that they want to work with. And, in the PRC, there's probably, I don't know, 30 some odd different stock contractors. So the animals that stock contractor owns, they will take them rodeo to rodeo. But if you're at rodeo in Omaha versus Absaroka, you might not have the same stock contractor.
And Marty, I assume that unlike other sports, there's no instant replay.
Not yet, no. Other than when we went digital with the cameras, that was a kind of an instant replay. And I've had guys after the rodeo come up and say, "I got to see that because I think this happened." And I've had judges ask me to see things because they question their call, and not that they can change it afterwards, but it helps them in their mind to say, "Yeah, I guess I made the right call," or "Whoop, I blew that one." So it's all strictly unofficial, but in a sense, there is some instant replay because of that. So, any other questions at this point? And we'll get more into the rough stock and all 7 events. We'll see some examples of all that, so you'll have some more chances to develop some good questions for me. So entertainment. Rodeo is an entertainment. It's a sport as much as it is a live entertainment. And so the rodeo committees generally spend a lot of money to bring in big contract acts that are going to do things like this, drag a big truck into the arena. This guy, John Payne, has an act where he's called the one-arm bandit because he lost an arm in an accident years ago. He's one of the best horsemen I've ever seen. And he will chase bulls and buffalo around the arena up on top of this trailer you see coming in there, and ride up on top of it with them, and all this with one hand, and doing a lot of leg cues with his to move his horse in the right direction. It's really a sight to behold if you've never had the opportunity to see him. If you ever hear he's coming to a rodeo near you, he's worth the price of admission alone. So when you're shooting rodeos, like this is an indoor arena, as is this, and you go from a lighted house to a dark house. And I've learned to, in the dark, kind of adjust my cameras pretty quickly so that I can get the correct exposures. So when I said earlier that, I work in a lot of challenging light, everywhere I go, you get, bad lighting in the arena, indoors or out. You can get some good lighting. You can get daylight lighting. Again, these are some of those that I shot up at around 8,000 ISO, and it just amazes me that they are crisp and clean as they are. I've done very little noise reduction to these, and I enjoy showing these to photographers because they can appreciate that, where the average person that I show this to just doesn't get that and why that's important. So it's good to have these contract acts. It fills time in between. For instance, if you're going from a saddle bronc down to the other end of the arena with a camp broken, you got to have something to entertain the crowd while all the players are changing sides. Backflip Johnny does just that, as his name says. He jumps backwards off of fences and off of, wait for it, his little mechanical bowl here. And this was a few years ago. He's like, at the beginning of the row, he's like, I need this picture. Nobody can get this picture. Well, Marty got that picture for him. He was so happy with the gun firing off. So the one in the barrel is a clown. The one outside the barrel is a bullfighter. But they're friends. They'll talk to each other. Any questions on the entertainment value of rodeo? Okay, well, I guess we'll move on to our bullfighters and our pickup men. For those of you who have been to rodeos and seen this, you wonder, how much do these guys get paid? And I'm telling you, it ain't near enough to do what they're doing. They risk their lives literally for these cowboys, and they got to be pretty handy, pretty agile, pretty athletic to make this happen and nobody get hurt. I don't know about you, but I certainly wouldn't want to go up against these bulls, and I've only had, honestly, in all those years, one really close call.
Is this a full-time job for these guys, or?
For a lot of these guys, it is. For these bullfighters, yeah, they will travel week after week after week and hit rodeos. They'll usually get kind of hooked up with one of the stock contractors and just spend the summer working for them or the year working for them for as long as their career will let them. It's not a longevity thing on their part. So this is a pickup man, and they get some pretty wild, their horses are big and strong, and you never know what's going to happen with this. But they are your best friend in the arena, whether it's me, the photographer, or the cowboy, or whoever. They know the sport inside and out, and they just make things happen. And again, you know, you're thinking these guys are going at a run and reaching down, grabbing the bronc rein of that horse to rein him in. You're helping the guy off of the horse onto another moving horse. You know, these guys are athletes. You can say what you want about rodeo, but there's no way you can convince me that they are not all athletes, both the animals and the competitors, as well as the help. So, bull riding questions? Or bullfighting, I should say, questions. So I will mention that the bullfighters do wear a protective Kevlar vest, and I have seen bulls step on those cowboys, and if it wasn't for that, they'd have crushed ribs and be getting carried out of that arena instead of getting up and going back to work. So it's a pretty amazing thing to watch.
So what's a typical retirement age for these individuals?
Yeah, so for the bullfighters, you know, I've had friends that have done it into their 40s, and even a couple into their 50s. On occasion, they'll come back because they just miss it so much. They'll come back and work a small rodeo. But on average, I'd say when they're probably mid to late 30s to early 40s, most of them kind of hang it up and find other things to do within rodeo, or just go home, and because they've been on the road for so long, it's time to stay home for a while, you know. All right, well, I guess we'll move into the riding events, or the 7 competition events. So most rodeos, when you're viewing them, kind of start out with the bareback riding, and it is a young man's event. These horses are young, they're wild, they whip you around. You have to have youth on your side to survive this, and you don't ride bareback horses much past your probably mid to late 20s, because your body gets so beat up from it that you just can't continue to do it. So what do you use for bareback riding? Well, you get yourself a leather glove. A bareback rigging is looks like a suitcase handle attached to a small piece of leather that actually wraps around the horse and gets cinched up, and that's what you're hanging on to. During the ride, your free hand cannot touch the animal at all, or you get disqualified. And you can imagine you're being slapped back and forth, and to not touch the animal is a challenge. In the meantime, you have to keep your feet spurring. They got to keep coming up every jump, up into the shoulders and back down, up. So there's a lot going on during that 8-second ride that these guys, and that's where the style and all the points come from. You know, if the horse is bucking hard, the cowboy is making his marks, he's going to have a good score. If one of the two aren't performing, you're going to have a low score. I should mention that cowboys are not paid to be at a rodeo like any other sport. They pay their own entry fees. The only money they earn is if they place in a rodeo and get a check. So it's not like, you know, going to you know, a football or a basketball game or even a NASCAR race where these guys are paid to be there. They're paying their own way, and they don't make money. They don't stay on the circuit very long.
Marty, is there any sponsorship that goes on with these?
There is. It's a good question, Steve. So there is. As the guys get better and better, they will find some sponsors to come in and help them out going up and down the road. But you have to get to a certain level in the sport. At the circuit level, most of those guys haven't reached that yet. When you get to the point you're in the top, maybe 50 riders in the country, yeah, then you're starting to get some of that help, that financial help. Here's a great shot where you can see him hanging on, his feet up in the shoulders. I mean, that's just a really nice bareback picture. The chute is probably the most dangerous time for these guys. It's not a very big area. These horses will buck up like you see there. I got to pause here again and see if we can let Trish back in, and then I got to talk about the gentleman on the horse. Let's see if she can get back in this time. So, y'all are from Nebraska. Anybody ever hear of a gentleman named Kyle Whitaker or Chip Whitaker? None of you? They are probably two of the best cowboys ever going up and down the circuit. Chip is Kyle's father. Kyle is the one steer wrestling here. Kyle has won 10 very prestigious awards, and it's called the Linderman Award. And it's kind of the equivalent of the Heisman Trophy in football. He's won it 10 times. His father's won it 7 times. Between the two of them, nobody in the sport will ever touch him. And so in order to win that award, you need to be a pretty handy cowboy. So what you have to be able to do is compete at both ends of the arena. And by that, I mean, you need to be able to ride the rough stock and do timed events. So Kyle here is very proficient in steer wrestling, as you see here, in calf roping and team roping, but he's also a heck of a saddle bronc rider. And so he competes at both ends and wins money at both ends. And you have to win enough every year to be out anybody else in the country that is doing the same thing. So 10 years running, he's done that. And he's just probably one of the nicest guys going down the road, great family man. But boy, what a talent in rodeo. So in steer wrestling, it is the only event in pro rodeo that you are allowed a helper, and that helper is called the hazer. So you got to get yourself a good fast horse and maybe a bulldog and team, which is owning both the bulldogging horse and the hazing horse. So you back your horses back into the box, one on each side. Cowboy nods his head. As I mentioned earlier, the steer does get a head start. There's a barrier string that the steer or the calf has to pass before the cowboys can leave the chute. If they leave early, they get penalized, and they aren't going to get the check if that happens. I guarantee it. So cowboy's going to ride up alongside the running steer with his hazer, kind of trying to keep that steer running straight. He's going to jump off a perfectly good horse at about 30 miles an hour. Try and grab hold of both of the steer's horns and literally wrestle that steer to the ground, turning that steer so that all 4 feet turn away from him when it's on the ground, lets go of the steer, gets back up, and the ride is complete. That can happen, as quick as, 3.5 seconds. And you think about that, they leave the box, he's got the steer on the ground that fast. Most of us can't even think about tying our shoes that fast. But I've seen it.
Is this where being a fat cowboy helps bring that steer down?
Well, they say yes and no. So they do say that the steer wrestlers are kind of like the linebackers in football. But I've seen little guys, and it's all about leverage in a lot of ways. I've seen some pretty handy small guys be able to turn these steers just as well. And you got to remember, these steers are probably weighing an average of 350 to 450 as far as their weight. And so that's, you take a guy that is, say, my size at 150 or 60 pounds and try and turn a steer like that, you've got to have some pretty good upper body strength and leverage. Whereas if you're 6'4" and you go 220 and you're in fit shape, you can turn that steer pretty easily.
Marty, are the horses quarter horses?
The majority of them are. It is the preferred breed for horses to have as a rodeo animal. Although I've seen Mustangs, I've seen Appaloosas, I've seen plenty of purebred paints. But the bulk of them are quarter horses, and a lot of that has to do with the fact they've got really great cow sense. So they can train them pretty well to do their job at the rodeo. I will mention steer wrestling for me, shooting the rodeos, is probably my most dangerous time to be out in the arena, even more so than bull riding. And the reason is, for me to get the right angle, I'm at the far end of the arena up against the bucking chutes, pointing back to where these guys are coming from and running towards me. The steer wrestling horse, the bulldog horse, is basically trained to, after the guy jumps off, keep running at a dead run until he can't and he stops. Well, he's usually running right damn near into me, and it's scary. I've had probably more close calls during the steer wrestling than I have at any other event during rodeo.
So Marty, obviously, if you're inside the fence, you're hand holding everything. You ever use a monopod or?
No, never. No, always handheld. And the less equipment that I have with me, the better off I am. So as you saw in that early picture, I've got 70 to 200 or 100 to 400 I use. Plus you throw a flash bracket on with a speed light. It's a pretty cumbersome thing to be using to begin with out in the arena. You're not changing lenses, you're just doing your job with what you got in your hands.
How much
Marty, I'm kind of a city slicker, and I've always wondered what causes those horses, those bucking horses, to buck. I know they're cinched on their hindquarters. What causes them to buck?
Yeah, so the cinch they use, I'll back up a second. So I will say, in the sport of rodeo, animal welfare is of top priority. So there's nothing that happens to these animals that's going to hurt them. The rule book is about yay thick. Probably 2/3 of that rule book is about animal welfare. We take that very seriously. On average, in a whole year, 1/10 of 1% of the animals are ever injured or killed. So it's a very, very small percentage. You got to think about it in these terms, where the livestock owner has a lot invested in these animals. That's how they earn their living, by using these animals at rodeo. So they're probably better taken care of than their own family members are in that respect. So what makes them buck is partly it's just an innate sense. They're at the rodeo because they want to buck. I'll tell you a quick little story. And Don, I don't know, I know that we had our time limit. I might go over because I got all kinds of great rodeo stories. But back in the 90s, there was a horse owned by one of the stock contractors. It was a loud Appaloosa horse with the big spots and all that. He was part of a hitch team that pulled wagons. Well, he didn't like that job, and so they sold him to the rodeo. The rodeo put him in as a bucking horse. And I don't know what I ever did to that horse, but I don't care which corner of the arena I stood in. When he ran, he would run right for me, and I would get chased over the fence every darn time. And this was a horse that, again, used to be part of a hitch team. I've seen barrel horses and calf horses that wouldn't do their job, so to speak, and they get sold off to the rodeo because they were good buckers. So a good part of why they buck is just a plain and innate sense to want to do it. That strap, that bucking strap you see around it, that's got a thick fleece lining to it. And when they cinch that up, all it really is doing is kind of tickling the animal, so to speak. So the animals are kind of trying to kick that off, more or less, because it doesn't really irritate them. It's just kind of a nuisance to them, if that makes sense. So those are the things that really make the animals buck. But they're at the rodeo because they're buck. They buck. They don't buck because they're at the rodeo, if that makes sense. John, I think you had a question.
How much do the steers weigh?
So the steers, on average, are probably about 350 to 450. I can only see a few of you in my gallery view here, so if you have questions, just feel free to speak up. So, all right, well, let's take a look at some steer wrestling pictures here then. You got to go play in the mud. That's always fun. Makes for great pictures. I'm sure the cowboys don't really enjoy it too much. This is not how you want to end up when you come off your steer, but what happened is that steer actually stopped running and the cowboy just kind of fell out ahead of him and on his head. This is really what you want to see. You can see where his right arm is just going to come up underneath that horn. He's already got his hand on the left horn, and they're going to get him to the ground and spin him that way. I love the expressions on even the hazard's face. They're yelling at him like that. But this is typically what the cowboys want to see in a picture. Now, you know, us as photographers, we might want to see something a little different, but I was there to sell pictures, and so I gave the contestants what they wanted, and that's exactly how I learned how to shoot rodeo, is by talking to the contestants and having them tell me, okay, if you did this, it would be a better picture of me and that kind of thing. And so over the years, that's kind of how I perfected the craft. More steer wrestling questions?
Not a steer wrestling question, but a question to do with what you just were talking about. This is fascinating to me because when we have our pictures submitted to like N4C and they're judged, and we get a lot of not a lot, but there are, you know, quite a few rodeo shots entered. Invariably, if you have this kind of a background, the picture just gets it gets no consideration because the background's busy and distracting. What you're actually saying is the cowboy doesn't give a damn about the background. He wants his, you know, he wants what he's doing showcased. And that makes a better rodeo picture from his perspective and from yours. It's just interesting to me.
Yeah, and that's absolutely correct, Nikki. And I'll tell you, I have never done good in competition with my images, and that's exactly why, is that the judges say, well, the background's too busy, but they miss the point. The background is the rodeo. You know, I mean, you're not out on the open range watching this happen. You know, you're in a controlled environment, and that's just part of the sport. And if more judges would understand that and use that as part of their judging criteria instead of using it against it, the world would be a better place for rodeo photography. But great, I'm glad you brought that up. Yeah, again, I can tell you more great stories about entering contests with pictures and getting in arguments with judges about things like that afterwards.
Well, you know, once in a while you get lucky and you have a nice clean background, but it's authentic, and you get what the cowboy would want and what anybody would want. But those are really darn few. Are those kinds of pictures actually easier for those of us who have to stay in the stands and shoot in the stands to get, where we can control our depth of field and so on?
Yeah, and you know, in some ways, sometimes yes. Only because the way that I'm shooting rodeo, I'm always shooting back towards this kind of background. If you're shooting from the stands, you might have crowd, but you might also have space between the crowd and the cowboys. if they're out in the middle of the arena. So you have an easier time isolating the subject from the background, where I don't have that luxury.
Very interesting. Thank you, Marty.
Yeah, no, great questions. This is why I enjoy showing this to photographers, because they get that. Again, if I just showed this to a bunch of rodeo people or to just average people, they wouldn't know and understand those types of things I ask. So thank you.
Marty, do any women compete in these events?
So yes, but so for a PRCA rodeo, Pro Rodeo Cowboy Association rodeo, it's pretty much, except for the barrel racing, an all-male venue. Women do have their own rodeo association, so they do compete in all these same events within their association. The only outlier to the barrel racing, the exception would be in team roping. We do occasionally get like a husband-wife team or something like that will compete together at a pro rodeo. So it's not that the women can't compete, but as a general rule, they're not going to compete very well against the men just by sheer strength and things like that. So they, one-on-one with themselves within their own association, they do very well, but it's kind of an apples and oranges thing.
You think that's changing, Marty? You think there's going to be more women?
Unfortunately, I don't see that changing in the PRCA anytime soon. What we see at the youth rodeos, the high school rodeos, things like that, we do see occasionally some women bull riders come in, and then there's been some that have tried at the PRCA, but it becomes more of a novelty thing than it does really a bona fide competition thing. Any other questions? All right, well, let's go watch some saddle bronc riding, and it is the classic event of rodeo. So the two original rodeo events, calf roping or tie down roping as we call it today, and the saddle bronc riding were kind of born out of necessity on the prairie and out of a sense of competition. So the competition part being, wow, nobody can ride a horse, nobody can ride a specific horse, and then of course the guys get together and say, well, I'll put 20 bucks on it, says I can. And this is kind of how saddle bronc riding was born back in the 1800s. And similar to the tie down roping, where who can rope the calf the fastest and get them on the ground so that they can doctor them. So that's kind of how these events started, and the rest of them just kind of evolved as time went on. So with the saddle bronc, they do have what's called an association saddle to start with. The saddle bronc riders do own their own saddle for this. There is no saddle horn, and that's for obvious reasons. When you're on a bucking horse, a horn is not what you want to have on there. So to get started, the cowboys get onto the horse in the bucking chute. And as I mentioned earlier, that's a really dangerous time. If those horses rear up, guys can get hurt pretty bad in there. So you try not to stay in that chute any longer than you absolutely have to. So you get your bronc rein measured out. And by that, I mean is that they've got a halter with a rein on it. And these cowboys get to know the animals, and they know how strong the head is, how much they're going to duck their head and pull up on their head. So they kind of quote unquote measure out that rein to get the correct location on that rein to hold on to help control that horse. So they nod their head, guys open up the chute, the horse comes bailing out. The cowboy needs to have both his feet up in the shoulders, toes pointed out when the first time that the horse hits the ground on his front feet. They're going to do this for 8 seconds, spurring along the way. And again, your free hand cannot touch the horse at any time or you get disqualified. So a lot going on there for the guys to be paying attention to in the matter of 8 seconds. There's a lot there for the judges to be watching. Again, both the cowboy and the horse, and that's how it all gets scored.
Of course, 8 seconds is a lot longer than one might think.
You got that right, Nikki. Yep. So you can see like that first picture there, that horse kind of came up. I mean, he bailed out pretty good. This one reared up pretty good when he came out. There is no controlling it. This is where you like to see the feet, the horse extended out really nice. You see his free hand up in the air, and you can see that good solid grip on that bronc rein. This is the picture the cowboys like. The pictures they don't like, of course, are this, but this is what we as photographers like, these great wreck shots. And I've had some pretty spectacular ones over the years.
Marty, is the reason they have to have their feet up when they're coming out of the chute, is that a style thing or is that a safety thing?
Neither. It's just the way the rules are. So it makes it for a harder time getting out of the chutes. If your feet were gathered up underneath the horse, there's really no challenge to it. Getting your feet up in those shoulders like this, and look at that horse. I mean, he's bailing, he's leaning to the side. I mean, that's tough to control and keep yourself in a good seat in the middle of that horse, like this guy didn't do. But then you have poetry in motion. I mean, this is just a beautiful bronc shot. That's what they like to see. Again, you can see, I mean, that horse is backing up into that chute, mashing that cowboy before he comes out. And now think about it. His head is probably, I don't know, 10, 12 feet up in the air right there. That's a long ways down to the hard ground. And then you got to wonder, what's he thinking as he comes off? Where am I going to land here that's soft, right? So that's a brief view of saddle bronc riding. And I'll tell you, my two favorite events, saddle bronc riding and the tie down roping. And they're my favorites because when everything comes together for both the animals and the cowboys, it's poetry in motion. It's just so fun to watch and to photograph. Bull riding is exciting, but those two events, you have to have some finesse and some skill to really make those work and be consistent every time. Bronc pictures or any other questions? Bronc pictures, Bronc questions or any other questions?
Yeah, Marty, I'm anticipating or considering going to Burwell, Nebraska for their annual rodeo this summer.
Say hi to Jim Svoboda for me.
I don't think I know him, but if I see him, I'll try that. Anyway, my question is, as a photographer doing some shots, and I'll be a spectator, of course. Mm-hmm. Any tips on how to get the best angles, etc.?
So that varies partly rodeo to rodeo. I mean, if you end up in the stands, it's tough, but you just have to kind of watch for the action to happen, and you have to think out ahead of the action. And this is where really knowing and understanding the sport, knowing and understanding the animals really pays off, because there's telltale signs that okay, this is coming, and you almost have to shoot out ahead of the action. If you wait too long, you're just not going to get the shot. So it's just really learning your subject, just like anything, is the best thing to do. As far as, getting different positions than being up in the stands, again, that's going to vary rodeo to rodeo. I mean, if they've got a fence line and, you go talk to the rodeo committee and let them know what you're doing and see if maybe you can get better access. You're never going to get out in the arena. That's a privilege for the PRCA member photographers, but you might be able to get a little bit better vantage points. One place you won't get is on the back of the bucking chutes. That's a no-no. That's really against the rules. Even for me to be doing that at any point, like if I was on the back of the bucking chutes during the saddle bronc or the bareback or the bull riding, I shouldn't be there. That's not really allowed to happen. So arena access can be tough, but it never hurts to ask someone. And the rodeo committee is the place to start.
See, Marty, I've had a lot of trouble getting into rodeos. For instance, I went down to the Sydney rodeo, mm-hmm. and I asked if I could take my camera, and they said fine, but then the rodeo photographer saw me, and I was kicked out of there.
Yeah, that's unfortunate, Ellen. So it's a challenge. I've been to Sydney. That's a huge arena. There's plenty of room for other people. The thing, if something like that happens again, I would say try to reason with that photographer. Just say, I'm not here to sell pictures. I'm here to take pictures for competition for my camera club. I think some guys will see it as you're kind of a threat to their business. It's one of the reasons that I'm not photographing rodeos anymore. It just became so hard to make money doing it, and even to break even on my costs of the weekend over the years has gotten tougher and tougher. So some guys are very territorial about that, and I can see why that would happen. They shouldn't have kicked you out of the rodeo. They should have just said, "Don't, you can't take pictures."
Well, I was allowed back in without a camera. But...
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. But even then, the photographer really doesn't have the quote unquote right to get you kicked out. That's really up to the rodeo committee more than it is photographer. So I guess if that ever happens again, I would see if you can find somebody from the committee and, plead your case with them. But the rodeo photographer really has no say whether you are photographing or not. As long as you're not getting in his way, he's got nothing to say about it. He may not like it, but he's got nothing to say about it.
Well, since then, I've looked at the rules with the various rodeo associations, and if you go strictly by the rules, it's pretty hard to get credentials.
It is. It's very hard, and that's partly because, especially with the PRCA, if you've looked into that. Although, from what I've seen in your pictures, I think if you worked at it a little bit, you'd be able to do it. But part of that is they want to portray the sport in the correct light, so to speak. So, as you can imagine, the animal rights people aren't real fond of rodeo, and they're going to do everything they can to try and shut us down. But those of us in the sport know and understand that, we're not hurting these animals. And so if you're showing like this calf roping picture here, for instance, if that calf took another 2 or 3 steps and he's in midair like this, and you see the rope kind of looks like it's choking him, and it's really not, but it's a split second. But if that's the picture that is out there for the animal rights people, that's all they're going to say about the sport, right? So the reason that it's really, really tough to get your credentials is that they want to make sure, number one, you're portraying the animals in the sport in the correct light. Number two, you know and understand photography and lighting. These images get used, not like, for instance, when I get done shooting rodeos, I would send images into the PRCA. They would get used in the Pro Rodeo Sport News or on the website or whatever. And they don't want to mess around with having the correct lighting and correct, anything else about it. They, like any other news organization, they want to get these pictures out there as quick as they can. So it's proving that, not only are you a good photographer, but you also know and understand the sport. And, again, the correct action, this is a great calf roping shot. The saddle bronc riding, or the nice extension with the horse and the feet up and the shoulders. That's what we want to be portraying the sport as. The wreck shots are going to happen, and and I've had good wreck shots published a number of times, but it's kind of a whole different story there. As long as, again, you're not showing the animal in any kind of danger, who cares about the cowboy getting hurt, right? So, so those are the kind of things that they're looking for. And again, the challenging lighting that we work in. All rodeos are not daytime rodeos, and if they were, there'd be a gazillion rodeo photographers, because anybody can shoot in that light and get good pictures. But when you can shoot, and you can see, I use the flash on this, when you can shoot in the dark, in dusty arenas, in poorly lit arenas, and still come out with good usable images, because that's most of the rodeos. I would say that more rodeos than not are shot under horrid lighting conditions. It's not for the faint of heart if you don't know what you're doing with the camera.
Marty, when you use a flash, is it TTL, or do you set it at a certain strength or power?
It is TTL, but it's pretty much going full bore. So I've was shooting with, I'm a Canon shooter, so the 550s up until I replaced them with some 600s. So they got a guide number that's going to throw that light out there roughly, 80, 90 feet. Well, when you're in a big arena, that ETTL and that kind of distance, you're just throwing light out there and hoping that it sticks somewhere is really what happens. Now, I do use an extended bracket, so I get the flash up higher than the camera, quite a bit higher than the camera, which helps the distance. But that's the challenge, getting as much light into your camera and getting good light into your camera as you can.
I want to, and this isn't really a question, it's just kind of an observation. Ties into Alan's question and your response to it about the, what is it, SPCA? No.
PRCA.
Okay. That's kind of the kind of thing you run into with zoos, actually, ironically, with botanical gardens and so on. So often we wonder why venues won't allow you to use photographs of the event or the space commercially, so to speak. And we're not talking about big commercials and advertisements and so on, but to sell it or whatever, or even to take pictures. They just don't even want you to take pictures. And a lot of times it is because the zoo, for instance, does not, they're very concerned with the welfare of the animals and the health of the animals and so on. And they don't want some kind of a photograph out there that looks as if the animal is being mistreated, or, from the point of view of somebody who says no animal should ever be in captivity, is misused. So that isn't anything to talk about or argue about or even discuss right here, but it is a reason why zoos have these kinds of regulations that they have.
Yeah, great point. And, as I mentioned earlier, I mean, in rodeo, the animal welfare is of utmost importance. I mean, nothing is more important to the sport than making sure that the animals are well taken care of. I've been at rodeos where it's been so hot that they've shut the rodeo down because obviously it's just not good for the animals or the cowboys. But, you don't want to injure the animals. I was at a rodeo one time in Waterloo, Iowa, and we stopped the steer wrestling because it was an indoor arena and the dirt in the box got so compacted down, it became so slick that the horses were stumbling and falling coming out of the chute. So, nope, that's it. We're going to shut that down. It's just not safe. I've been at barrel races where they've shut the whole barrel race down because the dirt gets so compacted and just unsafe that we can't have that. We got to have safety for the animals first. It's really that simple.
Good point. Really good point. Thank you.
So, well, let's go watch some tied on roping here. So again, they got to have a fast horse with some cow sense. They get a nylon rope, a cotton glove to protect their hands, and what's called a piggin string. And if you watch these pictures, when you see them, a lot of these cowboys are going to have in their teeth clamping down on a little, what's called a piggin string, and that's what they use to tie up 3 of the legs of the calf to get it tied down to the ground. So again, the cowboy's going to nod his head. They're going to open up the chute. The calf's going to get a little head start. The cowboy is going to be running after that, throw his rope, wind it off on his saddle horn so that the horse kind of will stop. That's a cue for the horse to stop, back up, keep some tension on that rope while the cowboy kind of slides down that rope, grabs hold of the flanks of the calf, gets them up in the air, puts them back down on the ground, and ties up 3 out of the 4 legs. And again, this all can happen in, 8, 9, 10 seconds. It's amazing when you think about that, how much goes on in that short of time. But I'm telling you, when it works right, it is the coolest thing to see. So let's go watch some calf roping. So you can see right there in his mouth, he's got that piggin string. And, it's not a new string every time. So you can imagine that it may not be the cleanest thing to have in your mouth. You can see there that little jerk line, that red line there, signals for the horse to stop, back up, and hold tension on the rope so that the cowboy has a little assistance getting the calf tied to the ground. So, it all happens fast for the cowboys. Learning when to shoot this picture, for me, it was a challenge to get that timing right. This is a girl doing what's called breakaway roping. They do that some open rodeos. So they do compete. The only difference is they don't have to get off the horse when that rope comes tight on the breakaway runs, and it breaks a little string, and that completes the run for the girls. So any more questions about tight-on roping or anything else that we've covered so far?
Marty, you mentioned sequence of the shooting. So each one of these are single shots and they're not bursts?
Never.
Oh,
Never. Well,
okay.
and I'll tell you, Larry, so part of that is, I grew up shooting in film, and it was expensive enough just to develop what so one of the bigger rodeos that I photograph every year is in Manoa, Wisconsin here. And, I'd shoot 15, 16, 18 rolls of film, 36 exposure rolls of film. Well, to get all that processed and printed and ready, and that was basically doing single shots, man, if I was motor driving, there'd be no way a guy could ever afford it. So I learned my timing shooting film, and it's come into play many, many times over the years. I've shot in pouring down rain with my camera literally in a big blue plastic bag, and I'm pointing in the right direction, but I can't see what's going on. And in fact, with team roping, I did this at a rodeo one time, and it was all more a sense of, okay, they've been out of the bet box long enough. One of them should be throwing the rope. I go click. And then, about a second and a half later, that healer should be throwing his rope, and I go click. And when I got the pictures downloaded that night, I'm looking at these going, I can't believe I even got these. But it's just because of the years of experience, knowing what should be happening when, and having a sense for that. And that's where I say knowing the sport really, really helps in that respect.
That's very impressive.
First would be a good idea.
I'm sorry, Nikki, say that again.
For those of us who are amateurs, burst might be a good idea.
Well, I'll tell you a story about that too, though. So for years, I shot the Minnesota Rodeo Association finals. And one year they decided they were going to bid it out, and I didn't get the bid. I didn't know who did until after the rodeo. And so what would usually happen is the rodeo was in October, and somewhere around July, maybe early August, they'd call me and say, hey, you got us on your calendar? Yep, okay, no problem. Well, that year, after the rodeo in October, beginning of January, I get a phone call and it says, Marty, we want to have you back to our rodeo. So I thought, that's interesting. So I went on their website, found out who the photographers were, and went to their website and took a look at the images. So I'll mention that it was a 2-day rodeo, indoors, award ceremonies and everything, and I would shoot, maybe about 700 or 800 pictures. So there apparently was a guy and a gal shooting it for the association that year. The girls' pictures in January, remember the rodeo was in October. In January, her pictures were up. She had over 3,000 pictures, and it's probably one of the most horrid places to ever shoot to begin with. And they were just not good pictures at all. Wrong angles, bad lighting, dust everywhere, all this stuff that I've learned to overcome over the years. The guy's pictures still weren't up because, as it said on the website, he shot over 6,000 pictures at a rodeo that I would shoot 900 for the whole rodeo. So that told me he just held his little finger down and hoped he got a good picture. He hoped he got a good picture. Well, if any of you have really used motor drive, you know that even doing that, you don't always get that correct frame. And with rodeo, there's one specific point that you need to get your picture. Every event has that one point. And the only way you're ever going to get that picture is just by being diligent and learning and understanding when to shoot that picture. Using motor drive, yeah, you might get lucky sometimes, but it's not going to happen every time.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other questions? All right, well, let's go check out the team roping and see how they do it. So as the name implies, it is a team. As I said earlier, the only event that gets a helper is steer wrestling. And these guys are each paying an entry fee. They're each collecting a check if they do well. So they are a team. They're individual contestants at the rodeo. So again, they got to have good fast horses with a cow sense. They back the horses in, nod their head, and everything goes. The healer, or the header gets up to the horse, throws his horse. There's 3 or 4 legal head catches. There's 3 legal head catches to catch that steer correctly. And the reason that is that, again, it's safety. And if you notice that in these pictures when we're going through it, most of those steers have protection on their horns, because you can imagine a nylon rope coming around on that horns, and it'd be like rope burn that you can get really easy. So again, we're protecting the animals by doing this. So the header's got the steer caught. He's starting to turn. He's dallying off his rope onto his saddle horn. The healer rides up, gets his rope underneath the back heels of the horse. Ideally, you want to catch both of them, pull your rope taut, and then both the header and the healer need to face off to each other with the steer in the middle. And then the flag drops and you got a qualified time. And again, we're doing all this in the matter of 5, 6, 8, 9 seconds on average. So a lot happens in that short of time. So you can see here, the header is just starting to dally off, and he would make a turn, and then the healer would come up, get his rope around. You can see it right around those 2 feet. The steer will be moving forward a little bit. He'll jerk back and get a nice taut rope, and then they're facing off, and they got a great qualified time.
Marty, how come cotton gloves and not leather?
I've often wondered that myself, but it's just what I suppose, because they're cheap.
Is this another event where the horses are stock horses, or do these?
No, these are horses owned by the Cowboys. That's what you don't want to be doing during team roping. He fell off his horse. That doesn't happen very often. But no, any of the timed event horses. So by timed event, we're talking team roping, steer wrestling, and calf roping, tie down roping, and then the barrel racing. Those Cowboys either own those horses, or in the terms of steer wrestling, what happens there is a cowboy might have a really good pair of horses that are used to working together, and they'll basically lease out that horse during the rodeo. If the person who leased that horse wins money, he pays 25% of his earnings to the guy who owns the horses. All the other events, those guys pretty much have their own animals.
Those can be pretty expensive horses too.
Yeah, so you can get lucky and find a pasture horse for $1,000 that turns out to be a really good rodeo horse, or you can pay upwards of $100,000 for a good rodeo horse. Kind of on average, you're probably paying between $10,000 and $30,000 for a really well-trained, well-broke horse that's going to do their job, but they're going to earn you a lot of money. Okay, so moving on to barrel racing. So as I mentioned, this is the one sport that women do compete in pro rodeo, but I will mention that is actually done so as a partnership with the Women's Professional Rodeo Association. And so the Pro Rodeo Cowboys are sanctioning barrel racing during their rodeo along with the Women's Rodeo Association. So all the money counts towards national finals or your circuit finals, just like it would for the guys. It just gives rodeo kind of that softer effect, let's just say. So you got some women in there, and then it gets the crowd going. The crowds love barrel racing. So again, you get yourself a good pass. And I'll tell you, a lot of these, so you asked earlier about the quarter horses. A lot of barrel horses actually come off the racetrack, and for obvious reasons. So they're big, tall, stout horses, a lot of them, and you get these young ladies who are probably about 3 feet high, and drive up in the big pickup trucks to get on their horse, but they are big, strong, fast horses, and you really need to know how to handle a horse if you're running barrels like this, because you're going full bore around the pattern. And again, average rodeo times, you're probably looking at anywhere from rodeos with 12 and 13 second times to bigger ones like Cheyenne, where you're into the 18 to 20 second range. But you're working hard for your money during barrel racing here. So you get a choice when you run into the arena. You can make a right turn or a left turn. You just got to do the pattern in the correct order, depending on which way you decide to go. So this is up Merrill, Wisconsin here, and every year I get a great sunset picture along with the barrel racing. Obviously at nighttime with the flash, so again, does it bother them? They don't even see it. So this is an example where this gal decided to go to the right side first, or excuse me, to the left side first, and then she came around. You got to get the little ones involved in the sport early. So how can anybody not love a little picture like that? This is what you don't want to be happening during your barrel race is she's on the wrong side of the barrel. She's coming off her horse. So, things just went horribly awry for her.
So do you have a favorite barrel that you shoot, or do you shoot them?
Great question. See, only a guy that's been to rodeos would understand that. So the best angle for shooting barrel races is to photograph the second, what's known as typically the second barrel. So when you come in the entry gate, the first barrel typically is to your right, and you come back around that left barrel, and it's just all about the approach to that barrel is why it makes the best picture. Even more so than the third barrel, and that would be my next choice if I had to choose between the two of them, to go to the third barrel. But the second barrel really, on average, gives you the best angle to photograph. Who's up for some bull riding? Hey, I hear the crowd go wild. This is what everybody loves at rodeos, bulls. How can a nice little guy like this be so mean? Doesn't he look like somebody you could just walk up to and pet? Come on now.
My sister's named one a few years back in the late 1960s. We were camping out at a rodeo, and we were down at the bullpen. And the owner's wife came by and started doing some work. And they asked if they could name a bull. So she wrote down the book. So for a few years, at least, there was a Brahma bull named Lovable.
Bubba bull?
Lovable.
Lovable. That's funny. Yeah, and they get some scary names. They get some funny names. It's just, and it really doesn't. Sometimes it speaks to the character of the bull. Sometimes it's just a name. But you look at this and he just looks pretty docile here. He's just enjoying being out in the hay there. But this is, before the rodeo, and he kind of knows that it's not quite time to go to work yet. So I'm just going to stand here and relax and enjoy.
Some bulls more aggressive than others.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. There's bulls that, again, a lot of times I was in the arena doing this, and the bullfighter would look back at me and he'd go something like that. And that would tell me that watch myself, because this bull will come and get you if you're not careful.
It's still ultimately his website and his fault.
I mentioned the former president apparently has a new page to his official website that allows him to share statements and video messages with supporters, which they can then post to social media. Jason Miller, his advisor, told Fox News that the former president was building his own social media platform. Is this it?
This does not seem to be it. It looks like a very
Yes. Can you mute yourself, please?
Where you can.
Thank you. Alrighty, so bull riders. Young guys for the most part. Again, you don't find them going into the sport to a very old age. They're usually done again by late 20s, early 30s. It's tough on the body, so, and why they do it, guys say they don't have a whole lot of brains, but I'm here to tell you that I've known bull riders who were actually doctors and lawyers, and so they come from every walk of life, and it's just that thrill of being able to do it, I guess, is why they do it. So What's their equipment? Well, they got a leather glove and a bull rope. It's got a bell tied into a knot on it to make noise when they're running. There's no other real purpose for it. Have to have a lot of grit and determination. So they're going to get started by kind of easing down onto that bull. If you ever watch PBR and you see the guys doing that, they're getting down real slow, not to spook the bull, just take their time and get comfortable and let the bull be comfortable. So they're going to drop this bull rope around the bull. You're going to tuck their hand into it. You're going to have their buddy, what a buddy, pull out all the extra slack and tie him on so he's never getting off again. With friends like that, who needs enemies? And they wrap that rope around their hand once, nod their head, and out they go. And again, free hand can touch it. Anything can happen, kind of a ride after that. I mean, and this is where, watching the bulls, you talk about athletes. I've seen bulls do some of the wildest things, wildest moves that you just wouldn't think a 2,000-pound animal could do, yet, they do it. It's just part of their job. But their job, they know, is to get that cowboy off the back. So he got a good shot of his hand wrapped in there. He's lifting on that, trying to keep himself centered right up in that bull. Because if they get too far off to one side or the other, they're gone. So, I mentioned I'll shoot in the pouring rain. You don't always get the best pictures, but hey, it's better than no picture at all, isn't it? He's going for a wild ride. This is kind of like you want to see. I mean, he's just sitting real nice right in the middle of that bull. That's a big bull there. Got his free hand up, just the way they should be. This was guy who decided he's going to get on a Boulder rodeo. He's not really a rodeo cowboy, but he's going to try it out anyway. That happened up in Superior, Wisconsin at an open rodeo. So this next couple here are kind of fun because now you see them. And now you can see him going. You got way off to the side. There ain't no coming back from that. You can see the bullfighter ready to jump in, and he's down on the ground. A lot of the guys do wear helmets now to protect them for obvious reasons. I don't think it's a bad thing at all. I mean, the flak jackets and the helmets I've seen save so many cowboys' lives. It's incredible. Look at the bullfighter behind that bull, about get kicked in the head there.
Ouch.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, just think, how am I putting my shoulder back into place after that? And again, you got to get started with the young ones, so they put them on some little steers and get them used to riding. And next thing you know, they grow up to be like this. And so I'll talk about Tim here. He's a calf roper. He trains every one of his horses to do this. And the announcer plays it up during the rodeo. He takes a bow at the end of his ride, and it's just kind of a cool way to end the calf roping at the rodeos. So,
Marty?
Yeah.
My husband said team roping used to be the big money event. Is it still?
There's a lot of money in team roping. There's events just like there's just barrel racing events. There's just team roping and calf roping events. Big dollars can be made at them. Yeah. You got to be at the top of your game, but there's certainly opportunity there. Yeah.
Marty, when you're using a flash, are you using the flash sync speed or high speed sync?
Sync speed. So I usually set the camera to 200ths of a second. I shoot aperture priority, so I'm shooting at 2.8 if I'm using my 70 and 200, or 5.6 if I'm using my 100 and 400. And then I just adjust my ISO as needed to have the right amount of light. I am not afraid to shoot at high ISOs. I mean, I shot at a rodeo a few years ago where it started raining during the rodeo. I didn't want to quit shooting, so I put the flash away. I pushed the ISO up to 25,000, and when I showed some of those pictures to the camera club guys, my club, they could not believe that those pictures were shot at that ISO. The blacks were still black. I mean, I had to do a little bit of editing, but I didn't have to do a lot of noise reduction on them. And it just wasn't there. I mean, these new cameras, I am not afraid at all to push them as far as we go with them now. That said, the reason I'm not is, I'm shooting rodeo. I'm not shooting fine portraits. You think back to the film days and we used to push, 800 ISO film speed up to 1600 or farther if we dared, and we had grain this big. Well, we just don't have that on these new modern cameras, even at the high ISOs. So take yourself, if that scares you, take yourself out of your comfort zone and try it. And I think you might be pleasantly surprised. Chris, you look like you got a little younger during this whole thing.
Must be taking a restroom break. Anyway, Marty, thanks so much. Any last questions before we go on to the end of our program? It was great, Marty. I think we all got an education on rodeo photography. Although obviously we would not have the aspect or the access that you've had, but anyway, something to look for on each event.
Yeah, so as Dorothy mentioned earlier, go visit that link on my website for the Rodeo 101. Feel free, if you have questions afterwards, to email me. I'm more than happy to interact with you and get back to you and with any questions you might think of later.
Okay, great.
Thanks for joining us, Marty.
Well, I'm gonna hang around and see what the rest of you guys, what the rest of the world does for a camera club meeting.
Marty said he wanted to stick around and see our show and tell, so I said he's more than welcome to.
I'm gonna grab a beer though while I'm doing it.
Okay, great.
Thanks for having me, guys.
You bet, Marty. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Marty.
Thank you.